Welcome. This is a quick walkthrough on how to use DynaConn to do dynamic functional connectivity on fMRI data. This particular section, I'm going to show you how to run the setup for DynaConn before you begin your analysis. Previously, I downloaded DynaConn and installed the path using the path tool. So now I can just type in DynaConn and that starts up the software. And you'll notice there's not much on the screen at this point. That's so that it can guide you towards configuring the setup. There's a couple ways to, or there's a setup, a couple options you can do at this point. You can configure setup, you can change to region mode, or you can change to group mode. Each one has its own setup, though group mode and GIF mode can kind of share the same setup because they both operate on GIF outputs or ICA results, whereas region mode operates on anatomical region time courses instead of independent component time courses. So I'm going to start with GIF mode. And so if I click on Configure Setup, the first thing it does is asks you where you want to store your output for the analysis. It stores the outputs as well as it'll store this configuration, this setup configuration. So that way, if you leave DynaConn and you come back to it, you can load a previous configuration and save time on setup. So I'm going to create a folder, just call it DFC out. I'm going to click open. So the first thing is I need to set up my or select my subjects. In the case of GIF mode for group ICA, it's pretty simple. You can point to the GIF folder because it's pretty standard setup, and it'll load. It sees that there's 4 subjects, and it's loading those 4 subjects. And in the case of GIF, there's also a mean file, which it'll also load. And then I click on Done, and you'll see that it used to be a red X, it's changed to a green check mark, signifying that that section of the setup is complete. I'm going to click on Group Setup, and there's a couple options you can do here. You can click on Build, which will create, I'll go ahead and click it here, create a default template, and this is a text file that you can save that text file so you can use it later, or you can load a previous text file. And the way this works is you have the subjects and then you have a number designating which group it belongs to. So in my case, my second 2 subjects here belong to group 2, and like I mentioned before, GIF also creates a mean file. You can assign it to either group, it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to click Done. And then there's the EV setup, or expected value file setup. And I guess I should mention, the only required field is the select subjects. The group and setup fields are not required, but they do open up some other options that you can use other functions you can use when doing your DFC analysis. So I'm going to go ahead for this example and load a EV file. There's a couple different options here. Your EV file. First, let me show you what an EV file looks like. So this is an EV file, kind of the way an EV file looks. The first column is there's other columns with other optional data, but the column that DynaConn uses is the first column, which is the time in seconds that a task is given to your subject when they're in the fMRI scanner. So in other words, this particular subject was given a task or stimulus at 68.5 seconds, 156 seconds, and so on. So if I click Open here, what it does is it adds the path of that file to this text file here, to this list. And that particular EV file is in seconds already, but sometimes they're in scan numbers, and so you can click on scan number, and then it uses this TR, this repeat time, to determine what the time is that each scan occurs at. There's also a TA field, but DynaConn doesn't use that information at this point. So you can either you can do this two ways. You can load a subject or a EV file for every subject, and you can see what the subjects are by clicking on this View Subject List, and this shows you that we have our 4 subjects and also that mean file. So you could load an EV file for each one of those subjects, or you can click on Use one EV file for all the subjects, which I'll go ahead and do here. You can also see we have the load and save functions like we did on the group setup. So if I click Done, now my EV file or my EV section is completed. Next is the region or the brain atlas and the data mask section. I should mention that if you don't do these options here and just click Done, there is a default Brain Atlas and data mask that will be loaded when you click Done. I'll show that when we're doing the group setup. But for this section, let me go ahead and just show you how this is done. I'll click on Load a Legend file, and the legend file is the labels for each anatomical region. And I'm going to use this Harvard-Oxford cortical region atlas, which comes from FSL. The XML file is the region file. You can see it has the names of all the brain regions. And so if I click open, it's loaded those labels. And then after that, you click on Load a Region Map, which is a nifty file. It's actually the nifty file that has the 3D delimitation or the 3D region itself, all the 3D regions, the brain regions. So I'll click on the cortical section, and you can also stack brain atlases. You don't have to use just one, so I can load another legend. And I'm also going to load the subcortical legend, and then I'm going to load the map for that subcortical section. So you can stack these, but you have to load them in order. If I was to load the cortical labels and then the subcortical labels, only the subcortical labels would be kept. So you have to load a label file, then a map file. And then I'll click Done. And then I'll select my brain mask, which is a nifty file. And again, this mask, what it does is it masks out all the voxels in our nifty space, in our 3D space that don't belong to the brain or are non-important in order to reduce the computational load when we're doing analysis. So now I can click on Done, and so that setup is now saved in our output file. So now if I was to click on a component, you can see now the tool is working for gift mode. And but first let me go to region mode and show you how that setup is done before we use the tool. So if I change to region mode and do configure setup, I'm going to go ahead and use that same output. In this case, it doesn't actually conflict with the gift mode because as you can see here, that setup that we had previously done in gift mode is saved and has an _n, meaning networks. And so in region mode, I believe it'll save with an _r, and so it won't overwrite that data. So you can save the setup from these two different modes in the same file. So I'll go ahead and use that same directory. So I'll go ahead and use that same directory. So I'll select my subjects. There's a few more options here because the output or the structure of the files isn't as standard as that gift output. So the way that you load the files is you have the path to your nifty file for each subject. So I can click on Add Folder, and the way my nifty files are structured is I have a nifty file in a folder for each subject. But I can click on this top level folder, and DynaConn will go ahead and scan each subdirectory to look for the nifty files. And so it's loading them now, and it'll list, it lists all the path to each one of those files here. You could also directly just type in these. This is just a text file, and kind of like the group setup we showed before, you can save this text file or load a previous text file that lists all your subjects. You can also, in this case, click on Add Subject, and then I'll add an individual nifty path. That's good if you have your nifty files spread across a lot of different directories. If I click on Done, so this is now this is when, so at this point now it's scanning to make sure each one of those nifty files exists, and also I believe it takes a little bit of scans them to make sure they're in the right format. And then I'll click on the group setup, and just like before, I'll click on build. The only difference now between this and the GIF setup is now we have the full file path, and we also don't have a mean file. So again, I'm going to make my second two subjects, I'm going to put them in group 2. And the EV setup is exactly the same. I'm going to use that same EV file. And in this case, I'll show you how this works, where if I just click on Done, it's going to automatically load a data mask and a brain atlas for this setup. Now it prompts me that if I would like to pre-compile the region average data. What this is in region mode, we don't have a TC for each region yet, because at this point all we have is our fMRI data set and separately our anatomical region map. And what this will do is it'll take the anatomical region defined in the anatomical region map, average those voxels over time, or average them at each time step actually, and create a time course for that region. And it's going to do it for all regions that we've defined. So all regions defined by the brain atlas. So I'm going to go ahead and click continue here, and so now it's going to build again, it's going to build the region average for each or the time course for each region. This can take a little while depending on how many regions you have and how many subjects you have, but this is needed so that whenever you select on a different region, it can quickly load that time course, and it'll display the time course for each different region. If you don't do this setup, it'll still function, but of course then it has to on the fly do the region average. So it's best to do this now before you use the tool, so that so that you can do your analysis much quicker. You can select between different regions much quicker. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this as soon as this is completed. Alright, so we've completed pre-compiling the region averages, and so you can see now if I click the different region, now I can see the TCs from those different regions and for my different subjects as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and go to group mode, and just to simply show you that now if I click on configure setup and I point to that directory we've been using, and we see that what's stored in there now, there's the session, the save session from our GIF setup and also from region mode, and there's that pre-compiled region data that we had just completed. So if I select this directory, it says that it's found a previous session because we already did the setup for group mode when we did the GIF setup, so I'm going to say yes. And so you can see everything is now already loaded. We have green check marks for everything, meaning that everything's been set up. So if I click on done, it's going to load that data, and we now can use group mode already without having to do the setup again.